The first thing Naomi Whitfield noticed about Heritage Hall was the smell. Floor wax, cut lilies, and the faint metal tang of metals that had been polished too many times. A string quartet played something soft near the far windows. 200 soldiers in dress blues moved across the parquet like pieces on a board that had been arranged long before any of them arrived. She stood near the coat check in a plain charcoal dress and low black shoes. A leather portfolio rested under her left arm. No jewelry, no name tag, nothing that told the room who she was. That was the point. 2 days earlier, a single memo had reached the desk of every senior officer at Fort Renwick. Office of the Inspector General. Command Climate Review. No name, no photograph, no arrival time, just 3 lines that had kept a lot of powerful men awake. Colonel Weston Price, the post commander, had spent those 2 days cleaning. Not the halls, the records. Complaint files had migrated from the shared server into a locked drawer in his office. 18 months of incident logs sat marked under review, which everyone understood to mean buried. He had told his staff to smile, to answer briefly, and to volunteer nothing. Above all, he had told them to keep Captain Rourke where the guests could see him. Because Rourke made the post look good. Captain Dalton Rourke was 30 years old and had never once been told no. 2 combat tours, a chest full of ribbons. A way of walking through a room as if the floor had been laid for him personally. He spoke to Junior, enlisted the way other people spoke to furniture, and no one corrected him, because Rourke delivered results, and results bought silence. He found Naomi 11 minutes into the evening. She was standing between a display case, holding a folded flag and a portrait of a general who had died before Rourke was born. She held nothing but a leather folder. She could have been a caterer, a contractor, someone's aunt who had wandered in from the parking lot. He noticed her the way a hawk notices movement in a field. Not because she mattered, because she did not fit. He nudged the lieutenant beside him, who let the help in early. Then he crossed the floor. He did not walk. He arrived. 3 officers drifted after him out of habit. He stopped 2 feet from her. "Excuse me," his voice carried the way a voice carries when its owner wants it to. "This is a private event. Soldiers and invited guests. You want the service entrance. It is around the back." Naomi looked at him, calm, unhurried. "I am where I need to be." Rourke smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile a man wears right before he does something he expects to be applauded for. "Is that right?" He turned to the small crowd that had already begun to gather. "She says she is where she needs to be." A few chuckles. He turned back. "What is your rank, sweetheart?" He let a beat fall. "Oh, right. The help does not get a rank." The words landed like a slap. Naomi did not flinch. Not a blink. That bothered him more than any answer could have, because people flinched. Privates flinched. Contractors flinched. Officers 2 grades below him flinched when he turned that voice on them. This woman stood there like a wall. So he pushed. He reached out and plucked the visitor badge from her lapel, a cheap adhesive tag that said only Whitfield, and held it up between 2 fingers, like something he had found on the bottom of his shoe. Whitfield. He read it aloud, dragging the syllables. No first name that matters, no rank. He let it fall to the waxed floor. "Pick it up. That is your rank tonight." On the floor where the mop water goes. The room did not gasp. That was the worst part. The room adjusted. A few officers turned away, most did not. 2 of them raised their phones. 30 feet away, Colonel Price watched the whole thing over the rim of a glass. He took a sip and turned to greet a city councilman. Naomi did not look at the badge on the floor. She looked at Rourke. "Are you finished?" Quiet. Not angry. Not afraid. Just a question. Rourke was not used to questions. He was used to people answering his. He took a champagne flute off a passing tray, the tray of a young specialist whose hands went still the moment she saw his face, and he pressed the glass into Naomi's palm. "Hard. Here, make yourself useful. Smile and pour. That is what people like you are good for." Someone laughed, then more. It moved through the group like a current, feeding on itself. A major raised his glass in a mock toast and said, "To the woman who does the dishes." Naomi held the flute for exactly 3 seconds. Then she set it down on the nearest table, carefully, the way a person sets down evidence. She opened her leather folder and wrote 1 line. Rourke watched her write. and for the first time something moved behind his eyes. Not fear, not yet, confusion. Who writes things down at a party? He buried the thought and leaned in close enough that she could smell the bourbon on him. You think a cheap dress and a folder make you somebody. It does not. You are nobody. You walked in off the street, like a stray looking for scraps. Naomi closed the folder. Do you speak to everyone this way? Only the ones who do not belong, and who decides who belongs. Rourke spread his arms to take in the whole gleaming hall. I do. Look around. You see anyone here who looks like you? The question hung in the air, and the terrible thing was that he was almost right. In a room of 200, Naomi was the only black woman not carrying a tray. 6 feet away, Specialist Lena Ford stood frozen with her serving tray, knuckles white. She had heard every word. She had lived every word. A different night, a different man, the same script. 4 months ago, a sergeant had told her she was only here to fill a number, and she had filed a complaint. And Price's office had answered with a single line. Reviewed. No action required. 4 words that kept Fort Renwick exactly the way it was. Rourke was not finished. Men like him never were. I will give you 10 seconds to walk out that door, he said. Or I call the MPs, and they will not be gentle. He lifted a hand and began to count on his fingers. 10, 9, 8. Naomi did not move. 7, 6. The officers behind him picked it up, a chorus, a countdown at a ball game, as if this were entertainment. 5, 4. Naomi looked past Rourke, past the laughing officers, past Price, who had turned his back. She looked at Lena Ford. Their eyes met for a full second. And in that second, the young specialist saw something in the older woman's face that she could not name. Not humiliation. Something steadier. Something that looked like a promise. 3, 2, 1. Time is up, Rourke said. Out. Naomi bent down, picked up the badge from the floor herself, and slid it into her folder. Then she straightened, folded her hands, and stood exactly where she was. The countdown energy drained out of the room. Something had shifted, and Rourke could feel it even if he could not name it. The woman was not leaving. She was not crying. She was not calling for help. She was waiting. Across the hall, near the doors, an older man in dress blues had stopped mid-step. Command Sergeant Major Elias Boone had 31 years in the Army and had seen a great many faces. He was looking at this one the way a man looks at a name he had not expected to read on a wall. His glass was halfway to his mouth. It stayed there. Slowly, Boone set the glass down. He said something to the young sergeant beside him. The sergeant's eyes went wide. He turned and walked fast toward the corridor and the phone on the wall. Rourke did not notice. He had turned back to his audience, warming to the applause. Fine, he said, quieter now than before. Your funeral. He turned his shoulder to her, the way you turn from something already handled. Colonel Price checked his watch. The higher headquarters delegation was due at the top of the hour. He straightened his tie and rehearsed his welcome. He had no idea that the review he feared was already inside his hall and had been for 14 minutes and had already filled 3 pages of a leather folder with everything it needed. Command Sergeant Major Boone crossed the floor. He did not hurry, but every step was deliberate, and men stepped out of his path without knowing why. He stopped in front of Naomi, came to attention so sharply that his heels cracked against the parquet, and saluted. General Whitfield. His voice was low, but it reached every corner of the sudden quiet. Ma'am, I did not know you had arrived. The word general moved through the room like a change in air pressure. Rourke turned back around. The grin was still on his face, but it had begun to slip at one corner. General. There were no stars on the woman in the charcoal dress, no ribbons, nothing. He looked at Boone, waiting for the punchline. Boone did not move. At the far end of the hall, the double doors opened, boot heels on hardwood, sharp and even. A protocol officer stepped in, young and pale, and his voice cracked on the first syllable. Attention on deck. The room snapped upright. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Through the doors came the installation's senior commander, a 2-star general named Harlan Vance, flanked by 2 colonels from higher headquarters. Price lunged forward, hand out, welcome already on his mouth. Vance walked past him. He crossed the hall, stopped in front of the woman in the charcoal dress, and saluted. General Whitfield. The command is ready for your inspection, ma'am. I apologize. We expected you at the top of the hour. The colonels behind him saluted too, and the silence that followed was not the polite kind. It was the kind that comes right before a building settles onto a foundation that was hollow all along. Rourke's champagne tilted in his hand. The wine ran over his fingers, and he did not feel it. His brain was doing arithmetic it could not solve. The charcoal dress. No insignia. Whitfield. Lieutenant General Naomi Whitfield. The Inspector General of the United States Army. The woman he had told to kneel on the floor where the mop water goes. She outranked every soul in the room, and she outranked him by a distance that did not have a name. Naomi returned the salutes in one clean motion. Then she opened her folder to the page she had been writing on, and she turned to Colonel Price. "Colonel, I will need your conference room, your equal opportunity, complaint files for the past 24 months, and every incident report filed under your command. All of them. Not the ones you selected for me." The color left Price's face in stages, first the cheeks, then the forehead, then the lips. "General," he said, "we were not informed of the exact hour of your that is correct." Naomi closed the folder. "You were not informed. That was the point." She turned to a major who had entered behind Vance carrying a briefcase. "Major, set up in the conference room. Pull the personnel files for all field-grade officers. Start with the commanding officer and work down." Then she let her gaze move across the hall, across the officers, across the enlisted staff holding trays, across the phones that had been recording. It stopped on Rourke, who could not meet it. It stopped on Lena Ford, who was shaking, and not from fear. "This is not a courtesy visit," Naomi said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. "This is a formal command climate inspection. Every person in this room is subject to interview. Cooperation is expected. Candor is required." She paused. "I have been in this hall for 14 minutes. I have already seen enough to know this will not be brief." Then she walked toward the corridor, and the generals followed her, and the room she left behind did not move for a long time. Word travels fast on a military post. It travels faster when the word is catastrophic. By the time the doors of the conference room closed, every building on Fort Renwick knew that a captain had told the Inspector General of the Army to kneel, and that a colonel had watched it happen and taken a sip of his drink. But the inspection that opened that night was never really about one captain. Command climate reviews do not chase a single man. They open up the system that produced him. Every complaint ignored, every log quietly buried, every leader who saw something wrong and decided it was not his problem. Rourke was a symptom. Fort Renwick was the condition, and Naomi Whitfield had come to open it up and look inside. She set 3 rules before the first interview. Every conversation recorded, with the soldier's knowledge. No one interviewed with their commander in the room. And start at the bottom, because the people with the least rank had the most to say and the most to lose by saying it. For 4 hours the pattern developed like a photograph in a darkroom. Slowly, then all at once. A supply sergeant who had been told she took a slot from someone who earned it. A young lieutenant passed over for a school seat that went to a less qualified man and told to focus on what he could control. A chief who reported a joke about the diversity hires and was told the officers were only blowing off steam. Every story different, every shape the same. Each one a complaint filed, each one acknowledged, each one followed by nothing. Every thread led to the same door, Colonel Price's office. At 9:15 the major knocked. "Ma'am, there is a specialist, Lena Ford, asking to speak with the team. She says she has documentation. Send her in." Lena entered holding a green logbook against her chest like a shield. She sat, set it on the table, and did not open it. "Take your time," Naomi said. Lena took one breath, then another, and opened the book. "I keep a log," she said. "Every complaint I filed and the date and what came back, and every incident I saw and reported. I kept copies because I knew the system would not keep them for me." The entries went back 18 months. The sergeant who said she was a number. A mop left outside her door with a note that read, "Your real job." Rourke 4 months ago, telling her they lowered the bar every year. Beside each one, in the same steady hand, the response. Reviewed. No action required. Received. Never updated. Case closed. Insufficient evidence. Naomi read every line she read them the way a person reads a letter from a world they already knew existed but had hoped they were wrong about. Specialist Ford. When you filed the complaint about Captain Rourke, did anyone from the command ever contact you? No, ma'am. Did anyone interview Rourke? Not that I know of, ma'am. Did you consider not coming here tonight? Lena looked down at her hands. They had stopped shaking. Yes, ma'am, for about an hour, then she looked up. But you stood there. He said every ugly thing he could think of, and you did not yell and you did not run. I have been keeping my head down for 2 years. I figured maybe it was time to stand up. Naomi held her eyes for a long moment. Then she turned to the JAG officer beside her. Enter Specialist Ford's log into the record. Flag every one of these complaints for failure to follow proper processing, and note that she came forward voluntarily, with no promise of anything in return. Yes, ma'am, Specialist Ford. What you did tonight took more courage than most people in this building will ever understand. Lena made it to the corridor before the tears came. Not the sad kind. The kind that arrive when you have been carrying something so long you forgot how heavy it was. Rourke's turn came near 11. He entered in his service uniform, no dress blues, no entourage, no glass in his hand. Just a man in a chair across a table from the woman he had told to kneel 5 hours before. Naomi did not mention the hall. She did not need to. Captain Rourke, are you aware of a complaint filed against you 4 months ago by Specialist Lena Ford? He blinked, vaguely. It was closed. It was closed, not the same as resolved. Were you ever interviewed about it? No, ma'am. Were you ever formally notified it existed? He shifted. I heard about it through the grapevine. Naomi made a note. Let us talk about tonight. There are several recordings of it on personal phones, currently being reviewed by my team. I would encourage accuracy. His jaw worked. His eyes dropped to the table. I was out of line. Describe what out of line looked like. A long silence. I said things about her, about whether she belonged. I used language that was wrong. You called her nobody. You told her to kneel on the floor where the mop water goes. You pressed a glass into her hand and told her that is what people like her are good for. You led a countdown to force her out. Is that accurate? Each sentence landed like a brick stacking on his chest. Yes, ma'am. And did any officer in that room step in? No, ma'am. Did Colonel Price? A hesitation. Loyalty and survival fought a short, ugly war behind his eyes, and survival won. No, ma'am. He was there. He saw it, Naomi wrote. She did not look up when she spoke again. Captain, I am not here to end your career over a single night. I am here because a single night revealed a climate that allowed it, and has been allowing it for a long time. Do you understand the difference? He looked like a man who had just learned the difference between a crack in a wall and a crack in a foundation. Yes, ma'am. You are dismissed for now. Remain on post and available. He stood, walked to the door, put his hand on the handle. Naomi spoke once more. Captain, the next time you ask someone what their rank is, consider that you may not want the answer. He left without a word. Price's interview lasted 47 minutes and did not go well. Naomi laid Lena's logbook on the table. Beside it, she laid the incident logs the major had recovered from the locked drawer in his office. 31 equal opportunity complaints in 24 months. 28 closed with no action, and 14 more that had been pulled out of the digital system entirely and stored on paper only with no trail and no accountability. Price had not simply ignored complaints. He had engineered their disappearance. He tried context. He tried nuance. He tried operational tempo. Naomi let him finish. Then she opened her folder. At 4:52 this evening I stood in your Heritage Hall. One of your officers called a woman nobody, told her to kneel on the floor, and tried to have her removed. You were 30 feet away. You saw it. You heard it. You took a sip of your drink and turned your back. She closed the folder. That is not context. That is command failure. He had nothing left that was useful. The report reached the desk of the Secretary of the Army 11 days later. 47 pages. It ended quietly and it destroyed loudly. Rourke was not court-martialed. Naomi had been clear about that in her findings. His conduct was a product of a command that rewarded aggression and punished dissent, and punishing the man alone would treat the symptom and leave the disease. But the symptom carried a price. He was suspended from his position. His pending decoration was withdrawn, and he was reassigned to a training post where there was no glory and no audience, to process paperwork for the same junior enlisted he had once looked through. His father, a retired officer who had taught him that the loudest man in the room wins, called the night the orders came, and for the first time had nothing to say. Price was relieved of command for loss of confidence in his ability to command. The 14 buried files were what finished him. He submitted his retirement papers within 72 hours. No ceremony, no folded flag. The gate guard waved him through on a gray Tuesday morning without a word, and then the quieter, larger wave. An independent equal opportunity office was stood up at Fort Renwick, reporting past the post commander to a higher authority. Complaints now had deadlines, acknowledged in 48 hours, investigated within 14 days. Every outcome logged where oversight could see it. A climate survey every 6 months, its results read at higher headquarters before the commander ever saw them, so that no one could control the story before anyone else could read it. And there was Lena Ford. A letter came to her in November, signed by Naomi Whitfield. All 3 of her complaints had been reopened and substantiated. The sergeant who called her a number was reprimanded. The men behind the mop were identified and disciplined. But there was one more line, added in handwriting at the bottom of the typed page. Specialist Ford. You kept the copies when the system would not. You stood when the room was silent. Your courage is not a footnote to this report. It is the reason the report exists. Lena read it 3 times. Then she put it in the logbook, and she set the logbook on top of her desk instead of under it. 6 months later, Naomi Whitfield came back to Fort Renwick, this time in full dress uniform, 3 stars on each shoulder, the same worn leather folder under her arm. The gate guard saluted so fast he nearly dropped his clipboard. She walked the post with the new commander. She noticed small things. A young private walking down a corridor without pressing herself to the wall. A mixed group of officers and enlisted sitting together in the break room. A bulletin board with the reporting hotline, printed large enough to read from across the room. Small things. But a climate is built out of small things. Near the end, she stopped in the doorway of Heritage Hall. Same floor, same wax and lilies. Somewhere on that parquet 6 months ago, a cheap badge had landed after a young captain tore it from her lapel. She could still hear the plastic hit the wood. She could still feel the glass pressed into her palm. The new command sergeant major, walking beside her, asked if she was all right. Naomi was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she had told almost no one. 26 years ago, I stood in a hall very much like this one. I was a private. A man with more rank than sense said something to me that I have never repeated to anyone. I filed a complaint the next morning. It came back with 3 words, no action required. She looked at the floor. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to answer that letter, I would. She turned to go. Rourke asked me what my rank was, she said. The truth is, my rank was never the thing that mattered in that room. What mattered is that a young specialist had been keeping a logbook under her training manuals for 18 months, waiting for someone worth handing it to. I did not change Fort Renwick. She did. I only opened the door. She walked out into the late sun where her car was waiting, set the folder on the seat beside her, and closed the door. Behind her, in the enlisted barracks, Specialist Lena Ford was packing a bag for her first day at leadership school. She picked up the logbook off the top of her desk. She did not need it anymore. The system held her copies now. She packed it anyway. Some things you keep, not because you have to, but because they remind you of the night you stopped leaving and started standing. The loudest voice in a room is almost never the strongest one. Real authority does not announce itself. It watches. It listens. It writes everything down. And when the moment comes, it does not shout. It simply refuses to kneel, and in that refusal it gives everyone still holding a tray permission to stand. This story is a work of fiction. Every event, character, conversation, company, institution, and situation in this narrative is entirely imaginary, created for storytelling and to explore dignity, fairness, courage, and the human cost of prejudice. Nothing here represents actual events or should be read as fact. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And tell me in the comments what you would have done if you had been standing in that hall. Respect is not handed down by rank. It is earned by character, and it is owed to everyone.